Today we're going to be discussing Texas Senate Bill 2610. It's a bill that was signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott. And I really think of this as a cybersecurity safe harbor for small and medium-sized businesses. Andy, I'm wondering if you could dive in a little bit deeper on this topic for our viewers.
Hey, John. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. To give you a 10,000 level view of what is in this bill, the first thing to say is that this bill only applies for small organizations that are 250 employees or less, and is in connection with their limitation or cyber liability related to breaches on sensitive personal information. If these organizations can demonstrate that they have implemented and maintained a cybersecurity program. Now, how this look like from an implementation perspective will depend on your company side. So if you are an organization that has 20 or fewer employees, you only will require to have like a password policy and some cybersecurity training for your employees. If you are less than 100 employees, the cybersecurity program that you can use is the CIS Implementation Group 1. And then if you are over that and less than 250 employees, you have to demonstrate that you actually are implemented and maintain one of the known cybersecurity frameworks like NIST or CIS or the ISO 27001 series. But the important factor here is that this is going to present some limitation on the civil liability of business in connection to a breach of sensitive information when they have these programs in place.
Hey, Andy, I know you're a big fan of the Center for Internet Security's, the critical security controls. How difficult would it be for a small business to implement? So if I'm in that 20 to 99 employee group, how hard is it going to be to implement implementation group 1?
So I honestly feel is not that hard, and maybe because I'm being expecting that everyone will have this already starting, right? So if you have never done anything related to information security and you want to start implementing implementation group 1 from the CIS side, it's going to take a lot of effort if you don't have anything. Now, these recommendations are based on best practices, that this is not the only framework that is going to discuss the best practices. So I think that the first thing that you have to do is just map whatever you have in place versus what the controls are going to demand from you to do, and then have a realistic plan of how much effort that may be. And for a small business especially, which this will apply, in some cases, as we will talk, this is not sometimes going and buying solutions. Sometimes these require process changes. You know, a lot of people think that cybersecurity is, oh, you go buy all these things. Sometimes it's just a change in how you manage certain things like your asset inventories that are going to be changing completely the way that you protect your business.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways for me after taking a look at the legislation is being shielded. The real world word is exemplary damages. That can be thought of as the punitive damages. So if you do participate in one of these industry recognized cybersecurity frameworks, you're actually going to significantly limit your civil liability in the event you do get breached. So for any viewers out there that own, run, or lead a business with more sensitive data, think healthcare data, financial data, you're probably going to be a little bit of a bigger target for some sort of a lawsuit in the event you get breached and your customers' private data is exposed. So to me, this is a really interesting opportunity for smaller businesses to get some legal relief.
Yeah. What I think is so one of my concern, and then we can get this on deep when in the next question is implementation group 1 is whenever you have more than 21 employees, you know. But for me, you know, and I think you guys will agree, password policy and training probably is not enough for a small organization, and that's where a little bit of the concern may be with this new. You know, some people will look at this and say, oh, you know, this is saying that this is enough to have these two things. And the three of us have been long enough in this game to know that that's not true. With the password policy and cybersecurity training, it will not be a good level of protection for those.
Which is my take on this, right? It's I can agree with the scope of the law. if you are following best practices, if you're doing whatever you can, you're not negligent, we'll cut you a break, right? Which is probably something actually that I've already often told my clients along the 20 years of past business. It is more likely without the law that if you show up in court for a breach and you can demonstrate that you at least tried, that you did something, you weren't completely negligent, you will be treated in a different way than if you show up and say, oh, I didn't care about cybersecurity, now I lost all your data, right? So that shouldn't even be part of the law. It's probably already part of the legal process. If you're not negligent, you are looked at in a different way. Now the law is institutionalizing that by saying if you follow best practices, let me call it for the way for now, then we will treat you better. Okay, fine. What I have a very big problem with related to this law is the level of the bar that has been set. And Andres already mentioned that. A password and cyber education, that's all it takes for a company below 20 employees. The three of us know very well how much damage that will cause to the entire, not to the cybersecurity industry, but to cybersecurity as a general. In a few, I would say about 10 years ago, if I remember correctly, the FBI came up with a report that said that 89% of computers at home are already compromised. Right? At home, I have an antivirus, right? I have strong passwords, and maybe I'm not. Most people are not cyber educated, but in these days, people are starting to understand a little more about phishing and smishing and all these things. And yet, 89% of computers are compromised. Now, take that into businesses below 20 users. In the in Texas, there are about 200,000 people that are in companies with less than 20 employees. I think there is 2 million companies in Texas registered with one employee only, the owner. Right? The numbers are huge. So now you're saying that all these people practically don't have to do anything about cybersecurity anymore. That as long as their password was more than a 1, 2, 3 pass, then they get a pass in court. And that, I have a very big problem with that.
And I think, what Pierluigi is saying is a great point to start discussing why is this important for the business leaders and the organization, right? I think we need to bring what this law is saying to context from a liability perspective, but also from a recommendation perspective. So maybe Pierluigi, you already started. Why don't you tell us why this is important to know about this law for business owners and leaders?
Well, it is important because if the law were written correctly, from my point of view, it would have been even more important because it puts a great deal of emphasis on the fact that if you do things right, then you get rewarded, right? And why is it important? Because for years, probably for 20 years, we have been trying to regulate and educate, right? At the same time. And regulations are always seen as a burden, a cost that I have to do. I worked a lot with banks over the years, and John works for a bank, and he knows how heavily regulated they are from that and many other points of view, right? So those are costs, that are burdens. Whereas now we're saying, we're not going to tell you anything. Just do the right thing, whatever that seems to be, and we'll reward you if something happens, which is a different way of sort of regulating, if you will, right? Without regulating. Fine. It's an encouragement. We're encouraging you to do something right about cybersecurity. But then again, password and education, really? Do we really think that this is going to be sufficient to stop hackers from taking over all the computers of these companies and using them for the next DDoS attack or whatever else they're going to do with it?
I mean, I think it's a great first step. I mean, an important piece of this law is that it doesn't create any new or additional regulatory mandates. There's no new enforcement agencies. It's 100% incentive-based. And I agree, Pierluigi, that it's not written perfectly, and there will be changes made to it. And hopefully, right, both fingers, all 4 fingers crossed, that any enhancements or additions, modifications to the law will retain the spirit of incentivization and nothing that's really punitive or enforcement related. As I think about the motivation to participate in a framework, I personally, if I owned a business between that 1 and 20 person threshold, I would skip right over the password and training part. Now, I understand the spirit. If we really think about how companies get breached and what the initial attack vectors are, we know, Verizon has a wonderful data breach and investigation report, and the latest 2025 report shows the successful initial attack vector 22% of the time is going to be the abuse of credentials. So think password, think of lack of MFA, password theft, credential harvesting attacks. The second most common attack vector, which was used 20% of the time, is the exploitation of unpatched vulnerabilities. And you could have a vulnerability whether you're 20 people, 200 people, or 200,000 people, and you're still going to become exploited. And that's nowheres in the threshold for the 1 to 20. And then the third most common attack vector, accounting for 16% of successful attacks, is some flavor of social engineering. So if we look at those three attack vectors, if I'm a small business, I want to participate, I want to be incentivized, I want to limit my liability, I'm going straight. If I'm in that 1 to 100 employees, I'm going straight to implementation group 1 of the critical security controls, and I'm really thinking about prioritizing those implementation group to address patching, so I can't have exploitation of an unpatched device. I'm going to be thinking about multi-factor authentication on anything that's web-facing, anything that's internet-facing, and I'm going to be thinking about resistant forms of MFA. So like I use a YubiKey, and it's a good MFA, and it gives me that additional phishing resistant factor of MFA. So from a training perspective, which is what they recommend between 1 and 20 companies, I can still make a mistake and not get burned because I have phishing resistant MFA. So that's kind of how I see things if I were to be a small business. I wouldn't mess around with the protections on 1 to 20. I'd go straight to the critical security controls.
I think what you're saying is important, and for me, even I 100% agree with what Pierluigi is saying on the lower tier. I think this is presenting a good incentivize for the next tier, and I think that's a positive thing to at least present, right? We want you to do the very minimum, and we have been talking about implementation group 1 for since version 7, so that's what, probably 3 years now or 4. So I think that's the positive side of this. The positive side of this is now they're incentivizing the use of a knowledgeable framework to deploy some of these controls. And I think that's something that we all discuss multiple times, is the marketing sale of information security, that sometimes they put you the flashy thing in front of you to try to sell you whatever that may be. And these frameworks are organized in a totally different way. Implementation group 1 has a total correlation with the Verizon data breach, because they have actually proved how much they can protect against those type of attacks. So I think that's, to me, is the positive side to say that this bill is presenting.
And I think we need to maybe touch on what these controls are. So if we think about the Center for Internet Security and their critical security controls, they're broken into 3 implementation groups. And these things began life a number of years ago as something called the Consensus Audit Guidelines. And they got a lot of companies involved, they got a lot of universities involved and smart individuals, and they had to come to a consensus regarding what type of security control actually stops a breach. And so there was a lot of debate and heated discussion of what should or should not make the list. That eventually became, I think, the SANS Top 20 list, which has now been turned over to the Center for Internet Security. So the power is that these controls actually stop breaches. And there's debate, of course, what percentage of breaches do they stop? But Andy, what in general sense, if someone was to achieve full implementation of the first group, approximately what percentage protection do they get from becoming breached? What does that number look like today?
I can't remember for all the categories that they grouped, but I remember that the malware category, they were able to stop 73% of the reported malware if you implement just implementation group 1. I cannot remember the other one. So if someone is interested, this is called the community defense model in CIS, and they have all the percentages based on the Verizon that breach. The one that I remember the percentage off the top of my head was, which again, people say, or only 73%. No, 73% of actual real breaches reported. So this is true things that happen. So they say with implementation group 1, they will be able to prevent. And this is agnostic of solutions. Very important. This is not, oh, if you use this EDR, or if you use that solution. This is agnostic about the implementation of the control correctly configured, of course.
Yeah, you seem enthusiastic about 73%. I'm not so sure I am. I know that we may never be able to stop 100%, but I think that if we took it a little more seriously at every level, we could approach a much higher number, 73%.
100%. Yeah,
honestly, it's
agree
pretty
with that.
pathetic.
I agree. Now, one thing more about the CIS, John, that is important for people to know, go to their page. There's something called CIS Navigator. And in the CIS Navigator, there is a way that you can map implementation group 1, and then you can map it to pretty much all the frameworks that exist, CSF from NIST or others. So they have a very cool tool that you can even download those in an Excel file and then build your plan from there.
Yeah, and personally, I know that there's maybe a half a dozen or so control frameworks that are going to be considered industry standard, and that will provide the larger companies their safe harbor based on this legislation. But in my opinion, unless you have significant resources with a very strong IT department and strong technicians, I would stay away from the NIST Special Publication 800-53, that control family. And the whole NIST cyber risk management framework with, I think that's 800-171. Those are really, really difficult frameworks to comply with. On the flip side, NIST knows that, and they converted one of the president's, several administrations ago, they looked at one of the executive orders, and NIST took it and twisted it and kind of made it relevant for business. And that's now called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So if you see NIST CSF, that's something that is digestible and achievable for small businesses. If you see anything that says NIST Special Publication, that's probably too much. That's ExxonMobil, NASA, they can go do that all day long, not the small businesses.
And it is true that larger companies, like the ones you just mentioned, probably face different kinds of threats. Even simply not because the threat is different, but simply because of the sheer size of the organization makes it a lot more difficult to control what's happening unless you implement the controls we're talking about. I agree with a lot of this stuff, right? I don't ask that a 20 or less user company start implementing the NIST, even the simplified one. Okay?
Yeah.
What I disagree is that the bar is, it's not even off the floor. The problem that I have a problem with the law is where they put the bar for the below 20. No, there's no mention of protections, IPS, a firewall, antivirus, nothing. It simply says, if I read correctly, maybe I'm wrong, but if I read correctly, it simply says a password.
Yeah,
I agree.
I mean, seriously, come on.
So I think the three of us can agree that bar at the 20 is super low, and we have, at least from our personal opinion, we cannot recommend that. We need to say that's not enough to protect your business. That's not due diligence. I don't know how these people can say that that's due diligence. So if someone tells me, is due diligence that I have a password policy and training, I would say probably not.
By the way, with the three of us, if we start discussing about what is a strong password, maybe we will agree. But I can assure you, we will have a conversation.
Yeah,
imagine having the conversation.
Imagine
having that conversation in a court of law, where right? It's just ridiculous. You cannot have that as a standard. What is a strong password? Should we go to passphrases? Should we use the extra characters because allegedly they make it stronger, but it's 5 characters long, so my computer can crack it in 3 seconds? what are we doing here? Really, are we? I understand the scope of the law. I understand why they are trying, what they're trying to do, the incentive, the simplification, but sometimes overly simplifying is counterproductive, right?
So
I think that portion of the legislation was written by AI.
No, the portion of the legislation was probably written by some people similar to, I remember a few years ago, there was a legislator in Washington. They proposed to turn off Bitcoin. And another one, they proposed to turn off the internet. I'm not trying to ridicule people here, right? I understand this is not their realm. They do something, we do others, right? But sometimes the legislators, they find themselves involved into things that they have no clue about because it's not their business. The advisors behind maybe should be doing a little bit more legwork to realize that really a password.
Yeah.
Come on, right? A password. If you go and browse what is the most used password, we are still at 1999.
Well, especially when people are moving towards passwordless.
Passwordless.
Right? That's password. Yeah. Passwords are dead. Long live passwords. But we can say that all day. But the bar is way too low.
Way too low.
One of the things that we had talked about is kind of keeping our episodes right around 30 minutes or so, and we're doing pretty good on time. And as I think about this, because I am a former small business owner, I think about this legislation and I ask myself, well, what would I do if it was 20 years ago and I was still running a small business? Like, where do I go from here? What's next? And some of the people watching might have that same question. And unfortunately in cyber, the same answer is applicable to many different questions. And the answer really is, it depends. And so you really need to consider, what's the size of your business? What's the type of data that you're collecting? And even though the size of your business pigeonholes you into the legislation, but it doesn't define the volume of sensitive data that you might be collecting. We could have a smaller business that does collect sensitive data in large volumes. That's got to come into your decision-making.
Every business collects sensitive data simply for a reason. Because think of my account receivables, right? That's not sensitive data to you, but if I lose my account receivables, I'm out of business, right? So every piece of information inside the company, unless you keep it on a piece of paper and you take it with you so it doesn't get burned in the fire, that's all sensitive information. This is another possible downside of the law, that it creates it may create, I should say, a sense of false comfort, where I'm doing what the law says, right? That must be right. That must be sufficient. And the next day, you lost your entire database of clients and accounts and receivables, and your company is out of business. Yeah, because somebody's having fun with your server. These are the dangers that we're running. And don't tell me SaaS, because SaaS, I can hack your password. I get into the SaaS anyway. Okay, so SaaS is not a protection. Okay.
Well, and then I think what that speaks to, like when I think about the "it depends" answer, what you've just described starts to touch on different institutions and companies having different risk tolerances. So there's the same condition can exist for more than one company, and they feel differently about it, and they're going to protect differently. They're going to respond differently. So I as I think about what's next, I know I'm taking these variables into consideration. So if we were to use some sort of an example, and let's say I'm a dentist, the three of us are all dentists, and we co-own a small dental practice. We've got 35 employees, and so we know we're collecting HIPAA regulated type data. It's going to be very near and dear to parts of our patients. We've got a small business that deals with our computers for us. They take care of our small office networking. They bring us our new computers. We call them up when something's broken and they come and take care of us. We're dentists. We don't know how to do any of this. So we now know that we belong in that middle group, that less than 99 employees, and we can do the implementation group one, but we haven't answered the first question. And that is, if you're wondering what's next, do you want to enjoy the protections of this legislation? And the answer could be yes, the answer could be no. The no-brainer is yes, of course I want to limit my liability. But as you look deeper, like, well, then what framework would you use? And as you look at those frameworks, you're going to end up having to have some sort of an assessment to understand the gaps between the expectations of the framework and where you are today. That takes time, energy, and money. And now you're going to be weighing, well, does that benefit of the reduced legal liability, does that benefit exceed the cost of going through the assessment? And when the assessment's done, you're not done. You have things to remediate. Now, I would say, in my opinion, and I'd like to hear from the two of you, I would not allow the assessor to do the remediation. I would stick with my current technology partner to do the remediation. To me, it feels a little bit like the chef brings you some food and you ask the chef, hey, does it taste good? Well, of course he's going to say yes. It must be good.
I may agree with you, except that the partner may or may not be able to do the remediation. Depends on the level of the partner. So maybe not the partner. I agree with not the assessor, right? You do the assessment, somebody else will do the remediation. Who else? It's to be decided. Because sometimes if I am in this current position, maybe it's because my current business IT partner isn't capable of doing more. We also need to consider that, right? There is something that needs to be considered about. There is an aspect of cybersecurity that I often make this consideration. The fact that we're referring to a framework finally is very important, because the market is full of noise, of companies that do something very limited, very pointed in one direction. And then you hear a lot of noise of 20 calls a day trying to sell you something. I do ransomware, but only if it's coming from Russia, or I do exactly that kind of password. The market there are a lot of companies that do very limited things. And if you don't know where to look, you end up buying things you don't even need, or things that do the same things overlapping. So referring to a framework is a very important starting point to be able to say, I have these things. I already have them. I don't need to spend money for this other stuff. Right?
I will agree with Pierluigi, and I will add, you need to have a good assessor. I will add that we have seen, I heard someone once say that they use, graduate students to do this type of assessment, and I was, well, that's the quality of your assessment, right? And the recommendation that you're going to get is going to be based on the person who's going to the assessment, how familiar are really with the framework, but also how they can give you good recommendations based in what you may already have, so you don't overspend.
Assessments can also cost money, so we also need to consider that people don't have unlimited budgets for these things, right? So if you start spending $30,000-$50,000 for an assessment, if you were the example you gave us, 35 people, and now you're spending $50,000 for an assessment, you spent the money that you were probably going to dedicate to cybersecurity 10 times over. And that's gone. So we also need to be aware of the fact that, the assessment, we love it because that's what we do for a living here. But not everybody is going to appreciate the need to have to spend now on top of the cybersecurity the money for the assessment, right? So we need to strike a balance somewhere.
Yep.
And I don't know that I have the answer for that right now in the last 30 seconds of the call.
Well, I know we're running out of time, so this was amazing. We didn't disagree as much as I would like to disagree with you guys. Maybe next time. Next time we'll do it. But I would
we'll find a more controversial topic.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Please be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and at cyberhouston.org, and stay up for dates and latest episodes and resources. Thank you so much. Have a great day.